Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rao's IAS Study Circle to get relevant material and important updates. Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified. This video is co-presented by Jatin Bhardwaj and Vaibhav Mishra. DNS is your one-stop solution to detailed analysis of current affairs which are published in the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. Articles dated 10th of May 2021 which are put up for today's discussion are listed on your screen and the time stamping for the same is given in the description box. So let us start with the first article itself. Well, before going into the video itself, there's an important announcement. If you are confused about which optional subject to choose, how to find the best teachers and academic support for your optional papers, and above all, how to prepare for the same during difficult times, well, look no further. Rao's IAS has best solution for your optional subjects and related problems. We are conducting optional orientation session on 22nd and 29th May 2021 in which you can learn from Rao's IAS teachers about how to prepare for optional subjects and how are we going to help you in scoring best in the mains examination. Optional batches are starting from 4th June and 5th July 2021 via live online classes. Consider this as a call to all those who wish to completely cover the optional subject by December this year. This will ensure timely coverage of optional paper, optional subjects, and then you can focus on your attention towards the prelims right from the January next year. And also keep revising the optional subjects till you appear for the mains examination. Rao's IAS is offering guidance for political science, public administration, history, sociology, geography, economics, and psychology from their centers at Delhi, Jaipur, and Bangalore. In the description of this video, there's a link which you can use to register yourself for the orientation program for the respective subject sessions.
So we will begin today's discussion with an important column appearing on page number 6, Outreach and Overreach. So the judicial intervention in response to the union government's flailing response to the health crisis has reached its apotheosis, which basically means the highest point, with the Supreme Court order forming 12-member National Task Force for the effective and transparent allocation of medical oxygen to the states and union territories on a scientific, rational and equitable basis. Now you can clearly see that here what we have is Supreme Court acting like a larger district magistrate or maybe a chief minister, because it has formulated a task force which will look into the allocation of oxygen cylinder. And this is quite contrary to what we understand judiciary to be. And this is what has been categorized by constitutional thinkers as a judicial overreach. There is no need to mention and to substantiate why this topic is extremely important and pertinent for UPSC syllabus. And so this is what we are going to do. We are going to first understand the basics of judicial review and overreach, what it basically means, what are the common and famous instances where judiciary has acted in a way where it looked like that this is not Supreme Court but rather Parliament or Cabinet Secretariat. Then how Supreme Court has gained the power through evolutionary timeline, we are going to understand that. And then finally, there are a lot of advantages because of which Supreme Court is encouraged to sometimes overreach, but that is not what Supreme Court should normally do because there are a lot of problems which are associated with it. And so let us now begin the discussion. Alright, so we'll start by first understanding what does it actually mean when we say that judiciary has overreached its mandate. And to be able to understand, you will have to take a step backwards, go into the basics and understand the separation of the power first. So the doctrine of separation of power implies that each pillar of democracy, we have executive, we have legislature and we have judiciary, perform separate functions and act as separate entities. So the legislature we know is empowered to make laws or enact laws. And the main task of the executive is to make policy decisions and implement the laws which has been enacted by the legislature. And judiciary is tasked mainly with the function of adjudication, adjudicating disputes and overlooking the functioning of executive and legislature according to two main fundamental principles. One is the Constitution of India and the second is the laws which have been passed by the legislature. So the main task of the judiciary is to see whether the legislature is functioning according to the Constitution of India or not, and whether the executive is carrying out its functions according to the laws which have been passed by the parliament and according to the Constitution of India. And so here comes the separation of power, according to which each pillar of democracy, executive, legislature, and judiciary, performs separate functions and they act as separate entities. And these different agencies impose checks and balances upon each other but may not transgress upon other functions, which basically means that our constitution does not allow judiciary to implement laws. And similarly, it does not allow legislature to look into adjudication of matters. And this has been recognized various times as a part of the basic structure to the Constitution of India. But what we are seeing over the years is increasing resort of judiciary to not only implement the administrative rules but also to formulate laws or to legislate laws. And consider these examples which are displayed on your screen. Under Vishakha case, the Supreme Court issued guidelines on sexual harassment, which is not the task of the Supreme Court. It is the primary task of the parliament to come up with such a law, which later on parliament did come up with. Then the Supreme Court, overbreaching its mandate, appointed an SIT on black money and gave it mandate to not only study the amount of money stashed in the accounts abroad, but also asked the committee to come up with rules and regulations which can curb the menace of black money. You can clearly see that this is the main domain of executive and not the judiciary. Then 2-3 years ago, Allahabad High Court issued an order which made it mandatory for government officers and especially the class 1 officers like IAS, IPS, IRS to send their children to government schools. This was in response to a public interest litigation which had suggested that since most of the officers send their children to private schools, they are not taking care of the government schools, and the only way through which the condition of the government schools can be improved is when it is made mandatory for the officers to send their children to the government schools. Then the judiciary banned the sale of liquor on highways, and we have seen in last 5 years how Supreme Court has interfered with the functioning of BCCI, which is not even a government body. And so you can clearly see that whenever we talk about the separation of power, whenever we look at the function of judiciary, it is about looking after the actions which have been first taken by executive or legislature and then judging whether they are correct or not. But what we are seeing on the contrary is the initiation of actions on behalf of the judiciary. What we are seeing is that it is taking suo motu cognizance of the matters and it is enabling rules and regulations and even going forward to make them into laws because Supreme Court has such powers. Now the obvious question arises as to where the judiciary is getting these powers from. And there are a lot of articles in the Constitution of India where you can see clearly that a lot of power has been given to the judiciary directly, and there are a lot of articles where the powers have been given indirectly to adjudicate upon actions taken by executive and legislature. For example, just have a look at Article 13. The state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by this part, and any law made in contravention to this clause shall be void. And so who is the one who will judge whether the laws being made are in contrary or contravention of fundamental rights or not? It's the judiciary. Similarly, there are other articles as well. For example, Article 32. And so let us know in the comment section which are those articles in the Constitution of India which directly or indirectly provide for the judicial review or enable the judiciary to review the actions taken by the legislature and executive. Alright, so when we have enabled the judiciary to review the actions of parliament and executive, that is the government, these are the constitutional powers. But since the promulgation of the constitution, this has not been the case. The judiciary has not always taken the power of judicial review to the extent that it can be counted as an overreach. Because judicial review is very, very important. It is also a part of the basic structure to the Constitution of India. But what we don't want is judiciary overreaching into the powers or mandates of executive and legislature. And so it is important for us to understand the evolutionary timeline, and only then you will be in a position to understand what are the important judgments which have enabled the judiciary to take such wider actions and decisions. And so the overall judiciary functioning can be divided into two parts, starting from 1950 to 1970 and 1970 onwards. And the first phase was such where the judiciary kept itself limited to the role it was envisioned for. It was a traditional judiciary which focused mainly on the constitutional validity of the laws. And the best example would be Gopalan case, which narrowly interpreted Article 21. So what we have in Article 21 is protection of life and personal liberty, which says no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedures established by law. And in Gopalan case, it emphasized on the procedures established by law. What does this particular sentence mean, or the term means? It basically means that in constitution you have a procedure which has been defined for you to pass laws. If any ordinary bill has to become a law or an act, it has to be passed from both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha and has to be ascended by president, and then it becomes the law. And so this is the procedure which has been given in the Constitution of India, and you can do whatever you want if you follow this particular procedure. And so the validity of a law that has prescribed a procedure cannot be questioned on the ground that it is unreasonable, unjust, or unfair. Apart from that, it also held that personal liberty means only liberty relating to person's body, and that's it. So now you can understand that what was the level of judiciary in 1960s, 70s. And then came 1970s, where you had remarkable judgments like Keshwanand Bharti and Maneka Gandhi versus Union of India in 1978, which basically overturned the Gopalan judgment. And it took much wider interpretation of Article 21. And it ruled that right to life and personal liberty of a person can be deprived by a law, provided it follows two conditions. One, of course, it should be enacted through a procedure which is established by the law. So, which basically means that if Constitution has given a procedure, you have to follow that. But that is not sufficient. That is necessary condition. But that law must also be reasonable, fair, and just. And this is what is known as American concept of due process of law. So now the judiciary gave itself a power which has not been given in the Constitution to judge laws on two matters. One was already written in the Constitution, procedure established by law. The judiciary will look into whether the law was enacted with the right kind of procedure given in the Constitution. But now, the judiciary will also look into the intention of the law. It will also judge the values of the law, whether it is reasonable or not, it is fair or not, or whether it is just or not. And on the basis of those judgments, the judiciary will decide whether this law is constitutional or not. And so in essence, what Maneka Gandhi case did was that it enabled the protection under Article 21 not just against arbitrary executive action, which was the case earlier, but it also extended the protection against arbitrary legislative action. Because what Constitution says is that procedure should be established by law. It should follow whatever the Constitution says. And once you follow that, you can do whatever you want. So what it basically means that if you are able to pass a law from both the houses of parliament and get it signed from president, it cannot be questioned. And so what can be questioned is the actions based on these laws by the executive. But now under the Maneka Gandhi case, the Supreme Court gave itself power to judge the legislations also on the merit, their values, whether they are fair or just or not. And so this is where the real turn in the attitude of the Supreme Court or the higher judiciary can be traced from. And also, it gave much wider interpretation to Article 21. Earlier in Gopalan case, it was just limited to person's bodily freedom. But now, it was enabled or it was modified to mean that whatever it takes for a person to live with full human dignity will be taken into account under Article 21. And so that is why now, right to clean air, right to clean water, all of this, such a wide ambit of rights have been considered under Article 21. And then of course, just before that, you had Keshwanand Bharti case where the judicial review was upheld as a part of the basic structure to the Constitution of India. So far we have understood what judicial overreach means. What are the famous instances in the recent past which show that judiciary is kind of overreaching its mandate, and from where it got the main power not to review but to overreach. And now it is time for us to understand why does it happens. And it happens mainly because of the failure of the executive and legislature to take timely action. There is a lot of corruption. There are a lot of delays, inefficiencies in the manner in which the executive act, which are a matter of another discussion. And also, apart from these, the executives are often unresponsive. And so, when the people at the ground level face any problem, they have nowhere else to go. And so, the only way which is left to them is to knock the doors of higher judiciary through an innovative mechanism provided by public interest litigation. Apart from that, we have seen how legislature and its functioning has declined in last 2 to 3 decades. There is a lack of debate. Most of the laws are getting passed without any fruitful debate or arguments taking place on the floor of the House. There's a declining participation, the number of debates are going down, and apart from that, the legislature is quite late in reacting to the contemporary issues. So when an issue comes to limelight, it's 10 years or 20 years down the line, the legislature wakes up and it enacts laws then. And so this delay of 10 to 20 years, what it does is that it provides a legal vacuum. And so when citizenry is out of options, they knock the doors of judiciary, and then, of course, sometimes it overreaches. And so what judicial overreach does, it addresses the inaction on part of legislature and executive, and it provides immediate relief. Because just one judgment, one decision, and your job is done. And so, in return, it makes the judiciary vibrant and pro-people. Judiciary, and especially the higher judiciary, is seen as the protector of the rights of the people. Then it helps in the protection of the spirit of the Constitution by giving wider definition to various articles of the Constitution. For example, Article 14, Article 19, we have seen how widely Article 21 has been interpreted. And so it keeps on increasing the spectrum of rights which are enshrined in the Constitution of India. So what is written could be this, and now what has been interpreted is much wider. And so of course it is in the benefit of the people of the India. And then of course, because of these decisions, the transparency and accountability is enhanced for the government, because now it becomes incumbent on the government to take action, because then they have lost a lot of credibility. The media publishes these decisions, and under the moral pressure, even the legislature and the executive has to act. But the things are not that simple. There are a lot of problems, because of which it is advised to the judiciary that they should not overreach, because first and foremost, remember that our constitution is based on a separation of power. And when judiciary starts overreaching, when the judiciary starts legislating, giving out orders in a manner executive does, it violates the basic structure to the Constitution of India, and separation of power is one of them. Because of which conflict is created between legislature and executive on one hand and judiciary on the other. Because legislature cannot decide upon cases. But when judiciary starts to make laws, they feel threatened by the increasing power of the judiciary. And so this kind of hostility between two pillars is not good. Apart from that, you should remember that judiciary is not elected. There is no way through which people can change judiciary. Of course, there are processes which have been given through which you can remove a particular judge, but it is unlike the government, which goes to the people for fresh mandate every 5 years. And so they are extremely accountable. They may be inefficient, they may be corrupt, but they are accountable. On the other hand, the judiciary is functioning, the judiciary's appointment, everything is opaque, and they are not accountable to the people. And so, if government goes out of your hand, you can remove it, but you cannot do so with respect to the judiciary. And so that is why they have not been given the power to make laws. They have not been given the power to act on laws. They have just been given the power to decide whether the laws are correct or not, or legal or not. And so that is why it has been judged as tyranny of unelected, which can turn democracy into juristocracy. And then you should remember that first and foremost function of higher judiciary is to decide on laws, to decide on fundamental rights. And when it takes up matters like these, when Supreme Court starts to entertain a lot of PILs, it actually overburdens the judiciary and increases the pendency. And so the need of the hour is judicial restraint. The judiciary must exercise self-restraint, and it should curb the temptation to act as a super legislature. By doing so, it will only enhance its own respect and prestige, because let's admit it, a lot of decisions which have been taken by judiciary to implement laws or to create new executive orders have not gone down well with people. And so just like when the image of government diminishes because of poor actions, the judiciary is also under threat because of the poorly thought out rules. And so when the judiciary feels that there is a need for improvement, they should compel the authorities to act and to pass appropriate executive orders rather than substitute judicial orders for the administrative ones. And this is what is called the restraint, where you advise the legislature, where you advise or recommend to executive to take appropriate or desired action, but you don't pass the orders on their behalf. So in this particular discussion, we understood what it means when judiciary overreaches into the mandate of legislature and executive. What are some important instances where judiciary has done that, how the judiciary got the power to do so, and how it helps in many cases, but overall it is advisable for the judiciary to not breach its mandate. Let us now move on to the next discussion.
So this article, which was published on the page number 7th of the Hindu newspaper, actually deals with the current situation of the Indian economy as well as the current situation of the medical fraternity in India. As per this article, the author has argued that India could replicate what it has done during the mid 1960s when India was going through the food shortage or the food crisis. As per the context of the article, India is facing the crisis similar to what it was facing during the mid 1960s. Now, what was the crisis in mid 1960s? These were food shortage, import limitations, and lack of foreign exchange. As per the author, the current crisis could be dealt with those measures which are taken earlier. So we can replicate those measures as of now, and we can find out a good solution to the crisis which we are facing as of now. What India has done earlier during the 1960s was that India dealt the crisis through the imports of the food grains and the domestic investment in the agriculture. As we all know, both these measures actually led to the Green Revolution in late 1960s, and we are still benefiting with that. After Green Revolution, India became the net exporter of food grains and food production. This also provided the self-sufficiency in the food grain production in the country and also provided a base to the food security in India. So, author has argued that the current crisis or the medical crisis through which India is going through, this crisis could be taken up as an opportunity. Yes, this is the key thing which author has actually emphasized upon, that this crisis could be taken as an opportunity to build a medical revolution on the line of Green Revolution in India. For this, what we require as per the authors are these 4 points. Now, these 4 points are not relevant for your prelims examination, but you can note down these points in order to write a substantial argument in your mains answer. The first one is the utilization of the existing industrial capacity. As we know that there are a number of industrial units which are actually utilizing the production of oxygen for their processes. So what we can do is we can shift the resources from those industrial units, those products, towards the production of oxygen, and that oxygen can be utilized to save lives of millions of people across the nation. The second point which was argued by the author was utilize the current surplus of the foreign exchange. However, author has not said what to do with that. What we can say is that these foreign exchange could be utilized to buy the best technologies across the world as well as the inputs for that. For example, India can buy the best technologies of oxygen concentrators as well as those production units which can produce higher and efficient amount of oxygen using the minimum resources. As most of them are importable goods, India can use its high foreign exchange reserve in order to buy those products. As of now, India's foreign exchange reserve ratio is around $576 billion. The next argument forwarded by the author was that states should raise their health spending to the budget. As of now, most of the states are spending around 5% of their annual expenditure on the health sectors, including the primary, secondary, and the tertiary services. So, what author has argued that states, all of them, should raise their spending on the health from current 5% to close to 10%. The last point argued by the author says that there should be a highly integrated price stabilization regime in India to avoid the food inflation, as what we have seen in the month of April 2020, that because of the lockdown announced across the nation, there was a high raise in the prices of basic food items, including food grains, milk, and related products. So, all these measures could be utilized to bring a new revolution or a medical revolution in India, which can help to boost up the domestic production of medical equipments and medical devices. This can be utilized in order to save the lives of millions of people across the nation, and this can also help in the current or ongoing indigenization program of Atmanirbhar Bharat. With this, now we move to the next article. The next article is related to the international space activity and a small accident. This accident took place regarding a rocket which was Chinese origin and it fell down in the Indian Ocean as a debris. The accident actually took place in the Indian Ocean near Maldives, and the entire debris fell down in the ocean itself. The context of the article says that debris from the last stage of China's long march. What is this stage? Stage is nothing but the last part of the launch vehicle or the rocket. This long march or the carrier rocket was part of last month's project of China to build up its own space station in the low Earth orbit. Now, the question is why this Chinese rocket has sparked a worry across the international community. Well, when a rocket is launched in the space, it's discarded boosters. Now, what are discarded boosters? Now, look at in this image. This is the rocket or the Chinese rocket of Long March. They call it as a Long March. In India, we call our rockets normally as PSLV or the GSLV. The objects which you are seeing in the lower part of the pictures are the boosters. These are the boosters which lift off a rocket upwards into the space. These are very heavy and very large objects, as you can imagine from the lower part of the picture where you can see people are standing. Now you can imagine the size of this rocket when you compare them with the size of a normal human being. These are very high and very large objects, and if they fall over the earth on the human population, they can create a large damage itself. So when a rocket is launched, its discarded boosters re-enter. So they come back to the earth. They are not sent into the space, they are re-entered back into the atmosphere after the lift-off, and they harmlessly fall into the ocean. So whenever ISRO launches a satellite in the space, the leftover part of the rocket or the booster fall back in the Indian Ocean. It is a standard practice. However, in the current case, a 10-floor large vehicle, now you can imagine the size. This is as equivalent to the 10-floor large building. However, the top part of a launch vehicle is where we keep satellites and other important instruments. The weight of this rocket was 18 metric ton and it went into the space along with a section for the under construction space station. While in the orbit, this vehicle kept rubbing against the air. So because of the friction in the atmosphere, what happened? It lost its altitude. Now assume this. Because of a well-defined formulation, the rocket was launching in a particular direction. Now because of the friction in the atmosphere, what happened? It lost its command and it got displaced in the upper atmosphere, or it might have chosen a wrong path altogether. The piece of this rocket hurtled through a low Earth orbit at roughly about 25,490 kilometers an hour. You can imagine a vehicle of that much weight going at this much of speed in the atmosphere, how much damage it can create. And because of all these activities, an uncontrolled re-entry became, so nobody was able to control this rocket or its pathway in the lower atmosphere. So what happened? The debris actually entered the Earth's atmosphere over Mediterranean Sea. It flew over the Arabian Peninsula and crashed near Maldives. Now you can imagine that what would have happened if it had crashed over the Maldives as such. Now, many scientists have expected that many of the debris will burn out in the atmosphere itself because of the temperature and the friction. However, it does not happen altogether. The large part of it enter in the atmosphere without getting burned. This incident has also raised the question about Chinese program for such initiative in the lower Earth atmosphere and its future course. Even last year, what happened was that the Long March rocket of the same 5B variant, well, we need not to learn this, has actually crashed near Ivory Coast. Well, this is not the first time when a Chinese rocket has actually crashed in such a manner. This is just a consequence of the another failure of the Chinese space station. However, in the last case, no injuries were actually reported, but many buildings were actually got damaged according to a report by the Reuters. As you can see the image on the right side of the screen, the upper image shows the kind of space station China is aspiring to build in the lower Earth orbit. And the next picture in the below screen is the part or the component which was about to get launched and go into the space to build the space station. A space station cannot be built altogether and cannot be launched altogether in a single piece, because as of now the human race does not contain a kind of launch vehicle to put up such a high and heavy instrument in the space in one go. So what we do, we put them in piece by piece, bit by bit in the space and combine them all together to build a single space station. And this was also seen in the case of International Space Station. Now the question arises, what caused the rocket piece to enter in the orbit? Why it cannot remain in a particular orbit or go down in a particular pathway? See, the background is when a rocket carry a payload into the space, other booster stages that reaches the orbit fire the engine again, and after completing their job drop back to the Earth and not remain in the same orbit. So it is like this. Suppose that there is an instrument which is having three different parts. It is going up in the space. It will leave the first part in the space and the leftover part will fall back into the Earth in the ocean or in the water body. As you can see in the video clip that there is a rocket in the space, it has launched a satellite, and after going through a frictional force of fire, it has re-entered in the Earth's atmosphere to get launched over the Earth's surface or over the ocean body. Now, in order to simplify things for you and to understand how a space station is assembled in the low Earth atmosphere or what China is actually planning to do, you can go through this small video clip where I have provided an animation to show how a space station is assembled in the upper atmosphere. As you can see on your screen, this is a small part which is launched separately by a separate launch vehicle. What happens is that different parts are assembled in the lower atmosphere, and this is how we end up getting a space station. This is an example of the space station or the International Space Station, which is a culmination of different space agencies including NASA and European space agencies. This is how different parts of a space stations are assembled in the lower atmosphere. And the entire part of the space station function as a single unit, and this is how we get a space station. And similarly, this is what China is actually aspiring to build in the near future. With this, now we move to the next article for the day. So now we come to the last part of the discussion, that is the scheme of the day. In this we have taken up 4 schemes from the Ministry of Minority Affairs. But before venturing into the scheme, we should know what minority are. Minority, as per the census 2011, forms a percentage of the total population at 19.3. We do not have the census of 2021, so this is the last and the most authentic data of minorities. As per National Commission for Minorities Act 1992, there are following 6 minorities in India. These are Muslims, Sikh, Christians, Buddhist, Jain and Zoroastrian, also known as Parsis. These are the minorities which are taking benefits under the Ministry of Minority Affairs and their related schemes. The first scheme is Naya Savera. Naya Savera means new beginning or a fresh beginning. It is nothing but a financial support for free coaching to only notified minority students in selected coaching institutions. So what government will do, they will provide a fund to the coaching center, and coaching center will provide free coaching to those students. The objectives are very simple: to empower the minority students and prepare them for competitive exams, and to increase their participation in the government and as well as the private sector. The Nai Manzil or the next scheme is nothing but a kind of skill development program for minorities. It is an integrated skill training program provided to the youth of the minorities in market driven skills, but it will target only the poor minority youth and will provide them a gainful employment opportunity in the future. The scheme will also raise the awareness and also sensitize in terms of health and life skills to these youth. It will also provide formal education and certification through National Institute of Open Schooling up to the level 8th and 10th to those minority students who have previously dropped out. The origin of the scheme date back to 2016 from Jammu and Kashmir, where girls of the minority communities were provided similar kind of benefits. The next scheme is Nai Roshni or a new light. It is for the empowerment. The empowerment would be related to the leadership skills among the minority women. So you should have a basic idea about the different targeted group under different schemes. Under Nai Roshni, minority women would be empowered and will be instilled confidence through providing knowledge, tools and techniques for interacting with government systems, banks and other institutions. As a consequence of this, what they can do, they can be promoted to become entrepreneurs. And the last one is Nai Udan. Under this scheme, minority students who are preparing for the main examination. In previous scheme, we have seen the government is providing financial support for the free coaching in selected coaching center, irrespective of the stage of the examination. Under this program of Nai Udan, what we are seeing that government is providing financial support for only those students who are sitting up for the main examination and who have cleared the prelims conducted by UPSC, State PCS as well as State Selection Commission. So if you are one of those students, you can take the benefit of these kind of schemes. If you belong to the minority and also is looking for financial support from the government, these are the few schemes where you can take the benefit at a larger extent.